Nope, not on yet. Hi, and welcome to episode 6 of Highly Effective Physical Education with Lynn and Lynn. Today we're going to be talking about reflection and how we use that in our physical education practice. We decided in 2015 that we're going to be discussing best practices. So with that, let me let Lynn Hefele introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Lynn Hefele. I'm a physical education teacher, elementary K-4 in the Huntington School District at Southdown Primary. I'm the Vice President for elementary and middle school for the Suffolk Zone, New York State APERD, and I'm the President and founder of Literature Enhanced Physical Education. Back to you, Lynn.
Well, like I said, we're going to be talking about reflection and how we use reflection in our practices. And one main thing that comes up when I think about reflection, of course, is videotaping yourself. And for anyone who's been through the national boards, that's a big part of that piece of becoming national board certified is the reflection piece. Because not only does the process require you to write about everything that you do and you think and you say and why you do that, but then with the video that goes along with the application, you're also reflecting there. So if anyone isn't recording, I know it's a very uncomfortable process to watch yourself when you're teaching, because I actually talked about with someone this morning our intentions of what we want, the way that we want to teach, and then when we watch ourselves when we've been recorded, sometimes are shockingly different. And I know that's almost always the case for me. I'm always surprised at what I had thought I was communicating or what I thought I was doing, whether it's providing continual feedback or moving around the room or encouraging students. I feel like I do that continuously, and yet when I watch on the recording, there's always so much room for improvement. So I think that's a really big piece for reflection. Another thing, and there's a new device that's out that I think Colin Brooks was the first person who I saw that was kind of reviewing it, and I know Kevin Tiller has it on his website, Phys Ed Review, called the Swivel, and it allows the iPad to follow you. So for some, having a person come in and record you could be like a stumbling block to keep you from doing it, but the Swivel actually, I guess, I'm not that familiar with it. I don't know if anybody else is, but anyway, the Swivel is a way to have your iPad kind of follow you about the room. Another way for reflection that I find interesting is conducting student surveys. So either using Google Forms or even just paper pencil, or asking students, getting their opinion, and then reflecting on what they said. A really example that comes right to mind for me on this is when I asked my students what their favorite activities were, what their least favorite activities, what they wished I would change. Hands down, and this was years ago, hands down, they came back with that information that they absolutely hated running laps. They hated that kind of a warm-up. So my warm-up was I'd write it on our whiteboard, run 2 laps, do 5 push-ups. It was kind of like a combination of things. I thought it was really fun. I had it written in different colored markers. They were all about the gym. It was self-paced. But hands down, they wrote that they really, really disliked that kind of a warm-up. So hence, I thought about, well, what else could I do? I'm trying to get them warmed up, not necessarily torture them. So, how did I change my practices? Well, now we do, some fun games that include those same components. And then I guess lastly, I think that the biggest point of reflection recently for me, just like how I'm changing my practices, I feel like just nonstop things that are causing me to think and go through that reflection process, or when I'm in these conversations in a professional learning network and people are talking about what they're doing, and it's making me think, am I doing that? Is that something I need to change? Is that a practice that needs to be different for me? And I know that Lynn, you and I had a funny conversation the other day on Voxer about using I like instead of I see. And Justin Schleider actually brought up the point of, I think he had recently read a feedback book, and how we can help children develop intrinsic motivation by using the term, I notice that you're doing something, and I see that you're doing something, instead of I like. Or even after we had that conversation, I notice I say, oh, I love it when I see kids, da 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 da, or I love that I see, and so I, like, my emotions apparently are running really high when I teach. So I need to switch that to I see and I notice. Points of reflection like that are like changing my practices, and I just think that's super exciting. How about you, Lynn?
I'm always amazed that, I guess I always believe that there are people that reflect and people that don't reflect. And for me, it's a natural thing. But I do think I see some people that are quick to blame something else for what happens in their gymnasium, and not reflect on their role in how things are working out. So I think it's important that we talk about reflection and how there are things that you can't control. You can't control if a child is eating breakfast in the morning. You can't control whether they have shoes, appropriate shoes sometimes. But the things that they do in your classroom that you have control of, you should be looking at and trying to make better. And one of the first things I remember very clearly reflecting on, I went to a conference, and I know you use this in your schools, the PBIS, the Positive Behavioral Intervention and Supports. I went to a conference, I got to say, it's easily 12 years ago on that. And I remember them saying, and they categorize children as green, yellow, or red behaviors. So some children will be red in that they're misbehaving a lot, your red students. And they said that a certain portion of the population will be red, and it's a very small portion of your population will be red. And if you have more children misbehaving than that tiny portion, then it's not the children, it's your structure in your classroom. So whenever I have a class that doesn't go well, I'm always going, uh-oh, what was it in my structure, in the way I had my classroom today, that didn't support learning, that caused the children to think that they could do this kind of behaviors. So that's the first thing I always, try to tell people, or I reflect upon in a school setting, whether it's in the hallways or in the cafeteria, or if Johnny be good is not being good, then it's what we're doing, because normally he's behaving. So that's one of my reflections. The second thing I like to reflect upon is transitions. How I can get my students from one spot to another, moving and keeping it a learning experience. Because we don't always have to walk to the next place. So I started making my transitions part of learning. Hop to the next place. Count by sixes as you jump to the next spot. That transitions, if you make them meaningful, don't have to be disruptive. So I started trying to focus on transitions and making them learning experiences. That was a really great find for me as far as reflecting was concerned. And I think the last thing that I reflect upon all the time is how to bring the Common Core standards and interdisciplinary activities into the gymnasium without losing physical education. So things that I kind of have added are skip counting. If there's a count, we're not counting by ones, unless you're in kindergarten, because nothing has to be by ones anymore. So if there's a score being kept, it's not 1 point for anything. Everything is 2 points or 4 points or whatever the children are using for their multiplication tables or their addition factors. We're using different numbers. If they go to the sideline to do, like a kind of tag game and you have to go to the sideline, then whatever thing they have to do to get back in will involve adding, or multiplying. 3 times 6 push-ups is what you're going to do. So, and none of that takes away from physical education. It's just changing how the kids have to process what they have to do. So I've always thought I try to do that as much as possible. I reflect on how I used to say it and demonstrate it, and now we'll read it, say it, and demonstrate it. So I think a lot of people don't realize how much of an impact they could make on the rest of the children's learning if they just reflect upon small parts of what they do in the classroom where they could add those small pieces. So if I could give that information to people, I would like them to reflect upon how you can incorporate reading, math, and writing without losing, and teach physical education. So those are the things I reflect about.
I think that the fact that you're thinking of those, how do I add the minutia in to make my students' learning more purposeful, I think that's really key in that reflection. And when we spend time thinking about our practices, and I don't know for you, the best time for me is when I'm out exercising. I just have these brilliant ideas. But when I'm sometimes very early in the morning as well. But when I'm reflecting on my teaching and I'm thinking about how I can use every second purposefully, and nothing is just for activity's sake, and likewise nothing is just for integrating Common Core sake, but trying to think of it as a puzzle. How am I going to make everything kind of mesh together and work together, and is there a better way? And that process of measuring and weighing and thinking is, like you said, did this lesson not go well because I didn't have it together? Did it go well because of poor execution on my part? Sometimes I know the barometric pressure changes and I think, wow, what just happened? But you're right. You're absolutely right. When a lesson doesn't go well, rarely is it the students. I mean, 99% of the time it's, and I would even take that further, those kids that you said are red, that's where a lot of my reflection happens, where I'm thinking about those children and I'm thinking, how am I going to make a connection with those kids? What am I doing in my teaching that's not working for them, and how am I going to switch that so that they can become equally engaged, and how can I adjust their choices? How can I, and a lot of times, like for my students that are there, I'll kind of put that on them. So I'll say, it seems like we've had this conversation a couple times about, I'm just thinking, you're not being able to keep your hands to yourself in line. And I really don't want to have this conversation with you ever again, if possible, because you're a smart kid, and I think you could probably figure this out. So what are you going to do? And, they'll think for a second, and they'll say, I'm going to keep my hands to myself. You're well right. That didn't work. So what else might help you do that? Because I know you can do it. I'm thinking that our situation here, it just isn't working for you. And so those kids come up with these brilliant ideas, like, oh, I think I'll when you say get a drink and think, pair, share with your partner, whatever it is, I'll take my conversation somewhere else, or I'd like to line up, in a different place, or I'd like to. They just come up with a solution that works, and
yeah, you'd
for
be
me,
surprised. It's crazy.
right, and that kind of, even causing them to reflect and kind of putting the ownership on them, I think is a practice that helps build that student responsibility.
You're right. Not only should we be reflecting, but we should be teaching our students to reflect. And I definitely don't do that well enough. That's for sure. And I had something I wanted to say. I lost it. Senior moment.
Well, I know just the other day with my students, I was having them. I had the iPad set up so that the students could watch their skill that they were doing, and then it was on. I was using Jared Robinson, the PE geek. I was using his app called BAM. It's called Video Delay. So they performed their skill, and then they went over to my computer and they could watch it. It was like, I think 20 seconds, 30 seconds later, and then they came back and tried to make the adjustment. And I had given them the critical elements that they were looking for, and then they came back. And I asked the students, what did you think about that? Like, why did that work for you, and why? And it was interesting just to hear their reflections, just to hear why they thought it worked. They said it's when you see it, you can totally tell what to do. Well, it's the same for when we teach. I mean, when we see it, we know that's kind of the point on videotaping ourselves or recording ourselves. But when we see it, there's really no arguing. That's me. That's what I'm doing. And obviously, those are not the critical elements of best practices. So I need to be like giving feedback more. I need to be more engaged. I need to be walking around the room. I need to, whatever it is. So, yeah. Big part.
I agree, and I think because I reflect, I look back at 10 years ago at how I was teaching and how far I've come as far because of a reflection. I remember, because I told you we team teach. I was always two in the gym, and I look back at my younger self and how I used to, we'd get the class started up, and then we used to go stand next to one another and talk. And then I don't talk to anybody but the kids during the class anymore. I'm constantly, if I'm not instructing, I'm assessing. And it's a constant assess. Whether I'm assessing, do I have the equipment in the right place? Am I using the right equipment? But more often than not, I'm looking at children and assessing and helping them. And I know that there are a lot of teachers out there that as soon as the kids are in activity, stop teaching. And if I could give one thing to people is that's the time you should be assessing. That's the time you should be really getting the information that you need to step in and help kids learn.
Absolutely, and I think you touched on something that's really important when when the activity begins or when the students engage in whatever it is that we have them engaged in. Our voice needs to be continuously giving feedback. Either feedback that I see you're doing the right thing, I see you're working hard. I'm really trying to infuse that growth mindset. So I'm trying to say, I see how hard you're working at this, or I see that you're really putting it to task. I'm trying to use a lot of those terms, not just I see that you're stepping with the opposite foot. I'm giving that direct feedback, but I'm also trying to encourage them to think of themselves as growers as far as the learning process. And back to your point, I firmly believe that many of us, get set, go, and then we're like, and that breath really needs to be like what you said. Is this working? Is this kid on task? Is this happening here? and our voice needs to be heard, because the students, it's like that intention thing. The students are not sure what's happening in our head. I mean, yeah, we're doing all that, but if we're not communicating it to them, then they're engaged and we're really not. I mean, we need to be encouraging them to move more and to do those critical elements that we're looking for, and give greater effort or whatever it is. I think you touched on something that's really important. So yeah, definitely a reflection point that I noticed the first time I videoed, that I was I don't know if it was from being nervous or what. I was just quiet. And I was pretty still.
Yeah, you don't want to be quiet or still. I get my steps in. I'm moving around the gym constantly with the kids, and one of my latest reflections, especially since I teach middle school now, is that I see children that I feel are invisible. They go through the day, and I don't know that there's people talking to them. There are so many kids that demand your attention, that the kids that fly under the radar. My goal, my recent goal reflection, is to identify those kids and make sure that I talk to them personally during the class at some point. So that's my new reflection. All right. I know we decided we were going to go a little bit shorter, trying to keep it under 20 minutes.
Absolutely. I think that was good. That was reflection on our part. So we got some feedback that people's attention span is not longer than 20 minutes. So signing out, we're glad anybody came and joined us, and let us know your feedback. If you find some great thing, some great point you think we need to reflect on, share it.
And if you have a best practice you want us to bring up, let us know, and we'll talk about it. Yeah, help us reflect. Bye.
Bye.